full day worked?
Yeah, and I am never too busy for this sort of thing. I love it. But everybody has to bear with me with the little rugrats always around me at this time of night. So thank you. Okay, so everybody's probably old pros at this sort of thing now, post-COVID. So I'm sure you know just as much about this topic, if not more than I do. But I will do my little spiel that I always do. And I have left a lot of time in this presentation for questions if people have questions at the end, but also if you don't and you're like, okay, that's enough of that. Uh, no offense taken there at all. Okay, so we're talking about online dispute resolution best practices tonight. So why does this matter? And I'm sure everybody has their own answers. So if you want to pop it in the chat really quick, why does it matter? Why do best practices in online dispute resolution matter to you? And maybe they don't matter. Maybe that's your answer this evening. And Marg, now I have a dog who's whining in the background. Okay, it makes a more effective mediator, absolutely. And some of the reasons why it matters might matter, just for regular mediation as well. So here are some of the things that I have here: convenience and accessibility, cost effectiveness, efficiency and speed, confidentiality and privacy, and access to justice, and also adaptability. Okay, and then what is ODR? So online dispute resolution is the use of online means to facilitate dispute resolution. This differs from the traditional dispute resolution, as historically it's often thought that resolutions disputes could only be facilitated in person. And I heard, as I came into the meeting tonight, I heard a little bit of a chatting about online dispute resolution and a preference being in person. And absolutely, and I think that mediators are they're peacemakers, they're peace bringers, and that human connection is super important to a lot of people who are attracted to this kind of work. So absolutely, I think that a lot of mediators, it resonates with them that their preference is to get everybody in person. So prior to COVID-19, okay, bye, honey. Many practitioners were kind of uncomfortable with ODR. However, because of lockdown, of course, as we know, um, we were kind of all forced to pivot and provide online dispute resolution services. Though the increase in ODR has only occurred in the last few years, online dispute resolution has been around since the 1990s. And prior to ODR, technology supported dispute resolution was also used and is still used, such as teleconferencing, though many practitioners felt then and continue to feel that the best way to resolve a dispute is in person. So here's the evolution of online dispute resolution, and it goes back and there's like lots more details, but I'm not going to bore you with all of that, just some highlights here. So technology supported dispute resolution has been around for a long time. Lots of people are familiar with calling in for pretrial conferences or whatnot. Lots of teleconferencing mediations were happening at the dispute resolution office for a long time. And then online dispute resolution. And there's kind of like a genesis there with eBay and some disputes that were originating online, which hadn't happened previously. And it was interjurisdictional. And so there wasn't really a physical place for these people to get a resolution. And there wasn't even really a laws established that could govern this sort of dispute. So eBay was one of like the forefronts when it came to online dispute resolution and its inception. And then teleconferencing continued use. Some rumblings about ODR, practitioners began to get online. And then the lockdown happened and the pandemic just like really forced people into that creative thinking. But some people were kind of slow on the uptick, and there was a lot of trouble getting people trained during that time. And then many folks started offering ODR, but few were very thoughtful about it. So there were kind of some mistakes that we learned from along the way. And that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about tonight about some best practices. So ADRIC developed a task force that I was a part of, and that turned into a committee to develop recommendations for ODR. And then post pandemic, many folks continue to offer ODR and seek professional development to improve their practice. So here are some of the core components of ODR as I see it. And apologies, my daughter abandoned her TV show, so I'm going to turn it off so it's not distracting me in the background. Multitasking at its finest. And this is one of the wonderful things about ODR and the opportunity to do these kind of presentations from home. I get all these distracting things. Okay, so one of the core components of some ODR practices is the asynchronous component. So we can have negotiation via email, instant messenger, text message, even those sorts of asynchronous components. There are also tribunals and strata that use completely asynchronous and text focused, and they do all the negotiation in that kind of model. So they have a secure platform and everything is done via written form. If somebody needs an interpreter or needs some accessibility because they have some literacy things, they can get a person to help them with that. And it's all done back and forth. And the mediator kind of controls the drip of the asynchronous communication. So if there's any kind of inflammatory language or something that's not helpful, the mediator actually has control as to whether or not that is submitted to the other side. So it's a really cool tool and something that's very different than in-person mediation. And then there's synchronous. So either you can do like a live time kind of written format for negotiation, or there is like live time, like video conferencing kind of stuff like that, teleconferencing, those sorts of things. Now, this is something that's coming into play very recently in the mediation and dispute resolution world is the use of artificial intelligence and automation with negotiation processes. So some models for online dispute resolution, we do have private sector, and then we also have the public sector. So in public sector, there are some more specific recommendations that are enforced. So for example, and many of you folks might remember this during the pandemic, the U of S and some other government kind of organizations, they were saying, hey, Zoom is not safe to use. You can only use WebEx. And it turned out from the task force investigations that that was kind of all smoke and mirrors. And there was actually just some kind of pricing components that were driving that. So it's very important for us when we're looking at the models of ODR to have our kind of critical thinking hats on it and be like, okay, is this actually about security and safety, or has there kind of been a deal struck? Because it came out during that time that WebEx was not any more secure than Zoom. Many platforms are equally as secure, but there are some kind of incentives in terms of pricing. So everybody kind of has to make their own decisions that way. And some people still will say, hey, no, WebEx is the way to go. It does have more security. But from my experience and my knowledge and the work that the task force did, Zoom is just as secure. It's just kind of interesting, kind of something that happened during that time. Now, some of the benefits of online dispute resolution as I see it here. Access to justice. So, when I'm talking about access to justice in the dispute resolution space, I'm really speaking to the fact that lots of people cannot afford to progress their matter through a litigation process. Maybe they do want to, maybe they don't, but oftentimes something like mediation can be much more affordable to them, but because of their geographical location, maybe they can't get to a mediator. So ODR allows that access to justice in that component. Efficiency. I find online dispute resolution to be quite efficient because there is no need to make sure that people can get physically in the room together. If there are geographical barriers, John was mentioning earlier that he works with some folks that are outside of the province. So that's another access to justice sort of thing. If folks in dispute are all across the country, all across the globe, this can be a really efficient way to get people, quote unquote, in the room together. cost effective. What is great for a mediator who is offering online dispute resolution services is you don't have a brick and mortar location, and so your overhead can be quite low. Now, you can get pretty fancy with some gadgets, and then maybe it's not as cost effective, but theoretically, you can pass those savings on to your clients, and perhaps because you don't have overhead, that is as much as somebody who has a physical office that they're paying rent for, you potentially can have different rates that might be more accessible to your clients. And then there is a certain sense of empowerment that can come for folks, especially if there's a little bit of a learning curve for them when it comes to technology. It can be a really empowering process for them to engage in something like this, and they can feel like, hey, I can also get out of this very easily. If I'm feeling unsafe psychologically and I need to take a break, they can just shut down their computer, go for a walk. They don't have to worry about meeting somebody in the elevator, walking down the stairs with somebody that they're in a dispute with. Some potential limitations of ODR. So there is a digital divide. And as I mentioned in the prior slide, how sometimes the use of technology can be empowering for folks, it can also be disempowering for other folks. There are people that are not very tech literate. And if that is the case, it's really helpful to do a little bit of an assessment with somebody to see if they're really prepared and able to engage in online dispute resolution. So access to tech is access to justice. This is another component that is very live, is especially during the lockdown, because ODR was really the only option for online dispute resolution. And there were folks across the province, especially in the northern communities, that didn't have stable, regular access to internet. They weren't able to access online dispute resolution services. So it's really important that any kind of way that we can support folks in being able to access tech, we have to remember that the access to justice. So in Saskatoon, unfortunately, we had some library closures, and that's massive for people because closures to libraries mean for a lot of folks that they no longer have access to internet, they no longer have access to legal information. So this is huge. And so keeping in mind too, if you're working with folks that are in a rural community that doesn't really have a stable internet connection, this can be something that you need to work with them about or figure out alternate means. And this might be a case where, hey, ODR is a limitation here. We're going to have to figure out some way to be face to face. Technological literacy, as I mentioned prior, it's really helpful as mediators because we're already conditioned to be impartial and non-biased and non-judgmental, because you can meet somebody who is 18 years old and maybe they grew up in a community that didn't have any tech, and so they have no technological literacy, as where somebody who's maybe 75, they really got into tech and they know a lot about it. So always stay curious and just ask the questions about people's comfortability with technology, rather than just assuming, hey, they're kind of in this age demographic, they're not going to want online dispute resolution, because that simply might not be true. They might actually prefer it. Who knows? Privacy and security. This is another important piece of the access to justice and technological literacy piece. If somebody doesn't really understand privacy and security considerations when it comes to online dispute resolution, I'm a huge proponent of informed consent. So if you're getting the sense when you're going through things with them that they don't really have a good grasp on that, giving them some reading information or having like a nice robust agreement to mediate that includes some of that, or an ODR checklist or something, can be very helpful. So data protection is another thing, always using an encrypted platform, always using encrypted correspondence. And then, as I mentioned, informed consent. There is this other piece, the impersonalization. I've had a situation where I set up a online mediation, and unfortunately one of the members wasn't able to get to the place that they were supposed to be on a stable internet connection with video and audio and all of that stuff. So they were ended up calling in via phone, and it was incredibly impersonal. We couldn't see them, and then all of a sudden they would start yelling and swearing, and then was like totally a shock because we had no nonverbal cues from that person, and it did really feel impersonal. Now, if you can get on everybody on video, you have a chance to do a little bit of rapport building. You can kind of see their space. You can feel very connected with them because you are seeing them perhaps in their home or in a more intimate setting. So it can kind of go both ways. But as specifically to text styles of online dispute resolution, there is that risk to impersonalization. So that loss of human connection mentioned already. And do the parties truly feel heard? Sometimes when we're facilitating something through an online dispute resolution platform, there can be a little bit of that loss because we're so focused or maybe even distracted by the tech. So the future of ODR, and I'm very excited about this, uh, and the possibilities that there can be. So hybrid models, I overheard again a couple people chatting at the beginning of this meeting tonight about how, what's great is that hybrid model. If somebody can't make it geographically, like cannot make it to the boardroom, but maybe you have one party that's in Regina and one party that just can't make it. Maybe you have a boardroom and you have an AV system that you can call them in, or you can do teleconferencing or something like that. So hybrid is great. Caution with that is a little bit of power imbalance. So making sure that, again, we're getting informed consent. You don't want to appear biased because one person is physically with you where the other person is calling in or videoing in. But it's a really great opportunity, again, in that access to justice kind of theme. Artificial intelligence for writing summaries, perhaps, being a note taker for you, transcription, all of those sorts of things. And then just keeping in mind any kind of informed consent that you want to do if you are going to be using any transcription or AI. You want to do something closed source, make sure you're putting out the bucks to have secure AI features if you are using them. So it's not open source and that data isn't going wherever because they're language learning models. So artificial intelligence, it is here to stay. What do we do now? I know that there is a little bit of discourse about how to use artificial intelligence in the mediation and dispute resolution space. I love artificial intelligence. I have made it my friend. I use it for many things, but everybody has a varying degree of their risk tolerance and also how comfortable they are with tech and AI. So if you're kind of leaning away from it right now, think about ways that you can interact with it or learn about it just so you know what's out there. Because the other thing that I also know, I haven't seen one come across my desk yet, but they are out there and they're coming for all of us, is disputes related to artificial intelligence. So, something for us to just have in our mind, even if we're not going to use it for our mediation or dispute resolution processes, thinking about it, learning about it, so that you can have informed conversations with people if it were to come up. I think in particular, like in many different realms and subject matter for dispute resolution, but I think that in the space of academics and in workplaces, we're going to see an increase in disputes related to artificial intelligence. And then your role in this changing kind of environment. It's important to think about that future and what that's going to look like for you as a mediator or other kind of dispute resolution service provider. So let's talk a little bit about best practices. And because we're in this post pandemic space, lots of you probably have offered online dispute resolution services, even if it's not your preferred method. So you probably already have a list of best practices. And here's my suggestions for best practices. Platform proficiency. So making sure that whatever platform you're using, you know it inside and out, or at least surface in a way that's going to make you feel comfortable and confident when you're providing online dispute resolution services. Digital security and confidentiality, making sure you're sending those emails and those links to the right person. For security, Zoom has very high standards when it comes to security. So I encourage you use a unique meeting room, use your passcodes, use your waiting room feature. Those are your main things with digital security when it comes to live meetings when you're doing video conferencing. But you also want to have secure internet connection, VPN if you need it. You want to make sure that your data is backed up and stored securely. Setting the stage online. So, how do you build rapport? How do you do all those things that you would do in person? Or what things will you adjust or do differently or add to your process when you're setting the stage for a good meeting? Maintaining neutrality and presence. It's different when you're not face to face with somebody holding that space. How do you bring your ethos to the online dispute resolution process? Managing emotions remotely, totally different experience, especially if you're doing something where you cannot visually see somebody. It's very hard to tell when an outburst is coming, and it can be really kind of shocking to the process. Effective use of tools such as a screen share, whiteboard, those sorts of things, and accessibility, as well as what are you going to do about those agreements? Practice management and ethics, and then ongoing improvements. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each of these topics. So the first thing that we're going to talk about here is our platform proficiency. So what you want to do if you're going to be offering ongoing online dispute resolution services and not just kind of one off like, oh, okay, we got to hop on a Zoom for this one meeting because we can't all make it, or I can't find a boardroom to book or something like that. You're going to want to book, or you're going to want to pick two platforms that you can get really comfortable with and you can learn about. Again, if you can know them inside and out, I really encourage you to, but at least know very well and very thoroughly the different tools that you're going to have to use for whatever meeting you're going to be conducting. And the reason why I say pick two platforms is because you never know when a system's going to go down. Not too long ago, there was a global Microsoft 365 outage. Nobody could access their emails. Nobody could access their cloud storage. And then for folks like us at the office, we couldn't even use our phones because our phones are voice over the internet protocol. So always picking two platforms and having a backup is really helpful. You can even go so far as to have like backup links that you send your clients. And then getting to know your platform. This is what I tell folks when I'm working with them to put together their online dispute resolution practice is you have to break the system. Try and reverse engineer everything that you might need to troubleshoot with a client. So try and fall out of the meeting. Try to play around with the settings in such a way that you can't get your camera on, you can't get your audio on, all those sorts of things. Have somebody that you can practice all of that stuff with so that you know very well how to undo any kind of stuff. Now, will your clients be able to be creative and make new problems and new troubles that you've never even heard of? Absolutely. But as long as you have practiced that, you'll be able to have confidence, even if something is kind of quote unquote like unfixable in the moment. You're going to know your platform so well, and you're going to know all of your troubleshooting techniques so well that even if there is something that you can't fix, it's going to be like water off a duck's back. You're not going to be stressed about it because you're going to be like, okay, no worries. We couldn't fix it. Let's hop on to our backup. And then you want to test your own tech very regularly. So if you have a headset like me, if you have a webcam, if you have a fancy tablet that you're using, if you have multiple screens, all those sorts of things, you want to test it regularly and you want to make sure that your updates are there, all those sorts of things, so that you know that you can rely on it, or if you need a backup or you need an upgrade at any time. So basically, you don't want to just have your online dispute resolution tech and systems and platforms and just set it and forget it. You want to engage with this sort of thing fairly regularly. And if it's not something that you're going to do on an ongoing basis and you're just going to be doing it from time to time, take it out and brush it off every now and again. If you have a partner that you can play around with your process and protocols with it, it can be really helpful in case you ever need to dust off this or have it in your toolkit. Okay. And then you are going to want to watch for updates. So if you are a premium subscriber to something like Zoom, turn on, like, subscribe to their newsletter because you want to know when there are updates, especially if there's going to be any kind of concerning updates. Back in the times of the pandemic, there was a system change to Zoom and that was part of the entryway when WebEx kind of took over there for a minute because there was a change to where their servers were located in such a way that it kind of opened them up to cybersecurity risk or perceived risk. So you want to watch for those updates in case there's going to be a change to your program that you're going to want to either learn about or you're going to want to consider changing. Digital security and confidentiality. I've already touched on this a little bit, but we'll go into it a little bit deeper here. Using encrypted platforms. Most of the ones that you'll see, like the big three that I talk about a lot are Zoom, WebEx, and Teams. Those are all encrypted. You're good to go there. If you are going to be using something that's a little bit more nuanced or different, you can always ask for a demo. You can ask to talk to a sales rep. You can look at specs. You can send it to me and I'll tell you if it's good to go. Always use a secure internet connection or a VPN. So if you're the kind of person that maybe wants to set up at a coffee shop or co-working space, oftentimes there's open internet that you can log into, like a guest Wi-Fi. And I really encourage you, if you are going to be offering online dispute resolution services, you want to be in a password protected internet like location where you can log into a password protected secure network. And you also want your clients to as well. Because if your clients are just on guest Wi-Fi, they have a door that can get to you that's not secure. And of course, you are the keeper of the keys for all of your data and then all of your clients' data as well. So it's very important to communicate that. Of course, there's limitations to what you can do. You can't control where your clients are, but if you can encourage them and you could even put it in your agreement to mediate or your ODR checklist, hey, I'm committing that I will be on a secure network connection when I'm engaged in online dispute resolution with my mediator. That can be helpful. And then, sorry, just to circle back to the VPN, in cases of if there are safety concerns between parties, you can encourage them to use the VPN if they like, because with IP addresses, and if you look at some of the details with the Zoom link, you can see where that meeting originated. And now you would likely be the person who is sending out the meeting link, but it can be very helpful and comforting, even if there's really no actual risk to their IP address tracing to where they are geographically. If they use a VPN, then it's just going to cycle wherever, and that IP address will not be tied to where they are geographically, and that can bring a lot of sense of security to somebody who is concerned about if somebody would know where they are. You can also use blurred out screens and things like that. I had a situation once where I was on a video call and somebody could kind of just tell by the way my house looked where I was located in Saskatoon, which was very interesting. They were pretty well on par where I was. So, with something like that, encouraging somebody to keep their camera off during the meeting. If you're doing asynchronous, that won't matter. But also, if they are to have their camera on and they're going to do a blurred background or a green screen background, you can encourage them or coach them to be hardwired in instead of using Wi-Fi, because anytime you're using fancy kind of tools with it, it does take more bandwidth and it can kind of create a glitch in the connection. So you can do some coaching with somebody if there is any safety concerns or if there's been any patterns of abuse or anything like that that they might feel more comfortable. These are some things you can keep in mind. Again, informed consent on any platform you're using, and you might want to put a clause or a piece in your agreement to mediate or some kind of other pre-mediation paperwork that you're sending out there about the risks to ODR as compared to in person. And we talked about secure data storage and file sharing. I use like Google Drive. I also use SharePoint. There's lots of different options that you can have. You can do password protection when you're sending out documents, and always making sure that you're coaching your clients about phishing as well. Because if you are sending them a link that's password protected and all of that stuff, you want to make sure that there's some kind of communication with them so that they're not all of a sudden in this pattern with you and then they open themselves up to a cybersecurity risk because they're so used to that kind of thing that they see something pop up and they're like, oh yeah, for sure, I'm going to enter that in. So it kind of goes both ways. Our sometimes our attempts at creating security in terms of the cyberspace can then kind of bite us the opposite way. So lots of informed consent, lots of talking about what you can expect in this mediation process. Setting the stage online. So tech readiness, you always want to be checking that, making no assumptions. Just because we're in a post-pandemic world and lots of people had to use tech throughout that and continue to use tech now, never assume that somebody is familiar with Zoom. Never assume that somebody is familiar with the digital online space. Always start from square one. Do a little bit of tech readiness with them. You can do a little quiz. You can just do a video call with them and see how well they navigate, all those sorts of things. Your intake, you want to do a really good job of listening, of making sure that you're kind of exaggerating everything that you would do in person to make somebody feel like welcome and like you're building rapport with them. You want to exaggerate it, lean into the camera, talk, like really reassure them, make sure you're using lots of affirmative language while still being neutral, but you really want to be expressive because you got to do a little bit of overacting because there is that screen between you and the other person and that risk to impersonalization. Additional clauses to agreements I talked about. I do have some samples that if folks are interested in, you can reach out to me. And we also have some on our website as well. Some sample kind of documents that you can use in terms of checklists for ODR and sample clauses. This is another thing that you might want to consider after your intake meeting or having like an extra meeting around, where if you're using a platform and you have specific tools that you want the client to engage with, like if you're using a poll during a meeting or you want them to be using like a collaborative style whiteboard, you can do like a little bit of a tech readiness meeting with them where you walk them through their tools that they're going to be using. Proud online. So, PROUD is our acronym for communication guidelines. So, we're being patient, respectful, open, understanding, and disclosing. And the reason why PROUD online is important and a little bit different than PROUD in person is there is a certain sense of safety and anonymity that works against us in terms of online communication. As soon as you are behind a screen, even if your camera is on, even if your audio is on, you're a little bit braver than you are in person. So it's really important to coach your clients about respectful communication online. Another thing that we need to be wary of as dispute resolution practitioners when we're doing things online is crosstalk using the chat feature, especially in situations where there's a private chat option. You can go into your Zoom settings and you could turn that off so they can't crosstalk to each other, but sometimes you might forget to do that setting. So it's really helpful to make sure that you're coaching your clients to be patient, respectful, open, understanding, and disclosing online, and to make sure that you're telling them, I don't want any crosstalk happening. I'm going to do my best to make sure the settings are such that you cannot message each other, but don't message each other if I accidentally did not do that. And also, don't be texting in the background to each other. Don't be on a different instant messaging app talking to each other when we're in this space. Let's be present. Let's be focused. And you can also invite them to build those guidelines, or you can be very directive. You can make it part of your agreement to mediate. It's up to you how you want to design all of this. These are just some best practice kind of ideas that I have employed. Maintaining neutrality and presence. So you want to stay engaged even if you're not using your video. So in my example that I was talking about earlier, where one party was going to be at their lawyer's office, and that's how they were going to be joining the session, and they couldn't make it for whatever reason. So then they ended up just joining from their phone and teleconferencing in. So if you're in a situation where you are turning off your camera as well, it can be kind of easy to be looking elsewhere. But again, that acting piece, pretend that you're on camera still, pretend that you're still needing to look people in the eye, really focus on what you're doing, don't try and multitask. Use more verbal cues to compensate for body language and nonverbal gaps. So as I was saying, do a little bit of overacting when you're the mediator online to kind of bridge that and bring your presence, bring your personality to the meeting a little bit more intensely than you would if you're the in-person setting. And do lots of check-ins with folks. Be mindful of screen fatigue. So I would say more meetings, less time online. We have screen fatigue all the time, even if we're not people who are regularly doing video meetings anymore. I remember during COVID, like it would be back to back to back to back to back video meetings because there was less need for moving yourself to and fro. So we would pack our days so full. And people have carried that forward into the post pandemic world. And then, even if you're not on video all day, you're likely on your computer for the majority of your day. And so are the clients that you're working with. So, shorter meetings, but more frequently, is often helpful. Managing emotions remotely. So, this is, I would say, one of the most challenging pieces for me about online dispute resolution is that it can be more subtle and more sudden when those shifts start happening because there's a certain like electrical charge that I feel when I'm in the room with somebody and their emotions are starting to get the best of them. And I can kind of check that, okay, I need to start calling a caucus here. Where I find because people who are in the meeting haven't necessarily done this work and they don't know to over exaggerate, it can go from 0 to 100 because you didn't notice that, they were starting to clench their fists because their fists were kind of off screen. And you didn't notice that, the color was starting to rise in their cheeks and stuff like that because maybe their camera was a little bit grainy. And then all of a sudden they've slammed their computer and they're out of the meeting. So it's very important to be on high alert. I recently have worked with a client to establish with me these are the kind of cues that we're going to use if you need to take a break. So I encouraged her to do a camera flash, so turning her video on and off to let me know that, hey, I need a break. And you can do other things like if you are comfortable with giving your cell phone number, maybe you want to give your cell phone number and then they can text you, and maybe you have your phone off to the side and you can see, okay, this person needs a break. And then you don't need to say it out loud, but you can say, oh, you know what, I need a break. And then you can put them in breakout rooms and go from there. But yeah, be very mindful of tone and subtle changes to expressions. Consider shorter sessions, use breakout rooms as needed. And now we're on to effective use of tools. Screen sharing, not too much. You want as much as possible. If you are on a video call, I like to see people as much as possible. But sometimes screen sharing, just the way flip charts are useful to helping people focus on the problem and not each other, that can be a really effective tool for people. The whiteboard feature for collaboration. If you have the right kind of clients and you're not too scared about what they might put on there, this is a really great feature to be using for the brainstorming, because what you can say to them is you can say, hey, each of you write up some of your ideas for resolution on the whiteboard, and then we'll start to evaluate them against your interests. Sharing documents. I'm going to pop these PowerPoints in the chat here for your reference. And so that's another great thing that you can do in Zoom and in other video conferencing platforms is you can do really easy sharing of documents. So if you have minutes of settlement that you've prepared or some other kind of document, or maybe there's some disclosure that's happening, people can just pop that in the chat and it's very easy and effective. And then there's lots of other fancy stuff. So you just want to learn the features. And if you are going to try out a tool, do a test run, do a role play. Try it out, break it, see if you can fix it, troubleshoot. And then if something is not working for you, feel free to abandon it and just normalize it. Just be like, "Hey, listen, I wanted to try using this share screen feature. I wanted to try using a collaborative whiteboard feature. And you know what? I practiced it. I tried it, didn't work. No worries. Tech is tech. So always have those backups and always really normalize it. It's okay to be human. It's okay to have mess ups, even in this online space. Accessibility. So teleconferencing is a great way to be accessible if folks either have some technological barriers or some tech literacy stuff. Calling in, giving them a Zoom number to call is a really easy way to get them into the process, and it's very accessible. Also, if somebody's eyes are not so good, teleconferencing can be a good option. Obviously not so great if they have some hearing impairment, but for folks that have other kinds of invisible or visible disabilities, teleconferencing can be a good option. Asynchronous options. So keeping in mind literacy levels at tech literacy as well as written literacy, asynchronous usually relies a lot on the written word. So if somebody is opting for an asynchronous dispute resolution process, but they have low literacy skills, doing some kind of confidentiality agreement where they can partner with somebody that can help them write can be really useful. The other thing about asynchronous options that support accessibility are the fact that not everybody has the same work schedule, not everybody's in the same time zone, and sometimes an asynchronous format can make the process more accessible to folks that maybe don't have schedules that really quite align. Tech and other literacy levels to consider, and what ways can you make things more accessible for folks if online dispute resolution is the only option for them and they have differing tech literacy or other like just written word literacy levels. What ways can you enhance the experience that can make it more accessible for them? You can do lots of accommodations. Zoom does have a closed captioning feature and it's live time. It's not always perfect spelling, so that's a consideration. You can have somebody live do translation for you as well. I've worked with a translator in live time. So you can get them hooked in to the process and get them bound by confidentiality and everything. And that can be a really good option for people that are needing translation services. For folks that are maybe hearing impaired, you could get somebody who is a sign language interpreter on. And that could be an option as well. So there's lots of cool things that you can do with online dispute resolution that are a little bit different than some things that might have cost barriers to them if you're in person. So, one of the translators that I worked with was actually in France. And so they had a totally different time zone than we were working in. But because we were doing online dispute resolution, they didn't need to travel. They were able to attend, they were able to provide translation services in live time, both written and verbal. So you could switch and toggle English or French on and off depending on what you needed. And it was a super cool feature, and it wouldn't have necessarily been possible with that particular interpreter if we had been in an in-person situation. Time zones is another reason why online dispute resolution can be more accessible for folks, because even if it means that they have to get up early or stay up late, at least they can come to the meeting, right? If they're in a different time zone and they can't get to you, um, online dispute resolution does build bridges that way. Hard outs and other scheduling considerations, what's great is that with online dispute resolution, you don't have to book a room, you don't have to drive to where you're going, all of those things. But it's also important to be like, okay, so when do we need to be online? When do we need to be offline? And what pivots might we have to make during this experience? Agreements. So Depending on what you're working with, you want to know from the client when you're doing your intake, when you're doing your prime, what kind of agreement and what kind of signatures they do need. Because if they do need a witness, is it okay if it's a virtual signing? Does it need to be a wet signature? All those sorts of things. It's really helpful to do that work ahead of time so that you don't go all the way through the dispute resolution process and at the end you have an agreement that nobody can do anything with. So e-signatures are an option. You can do the audit trail option, which is usually quite good and most people will accept that. But again, if there is a wet signature component, you just want to get that info ahead of time. You can share drafts, you can do live time collaboration if you're using something like uh, Google Docs, or if you're using SharePoint, you can do live time edits and changes and collaboration. And that can be really cool to watch because people will be writing things in and out. And it's a really cool experience if it's done well and if there's no troubles or barriers to tech. Independent legal advice. So if you do have an agreement that is going somewhere, I personally do like to put it into PDF and send it off. Um, Now, PDFs can be edited, so they're not foolproof that way, but doing a nice bridge letter as well, saying, hey, this was through online dispute resolution. These were the agreements that were that the parties came to, and they're needing independent legal advice on these things. Here are the rumble strips, things that they talked about and what was important to each of them. So it's really helpful to prep people for their independent legal advice meetings. And if those are also going to be online, connecting them with a lawyer who is comfortable with doing an independent legal advice meeting online and also comfortable doing a virtual signing if that's what's necessary. Practice management and ethics. So you want to make sure that you're up to kind of the minimum standard for data security. If you can do top end, great, but minimum. And then you always want to do regular backups of all of your data storage because you don't want to lose anything and you also don't want anything open to any kind of cyber attack. So you want to make sure you're testing systems and then you also have backups for your backups and etc. Client relationship management systems. Some folks do this like really simply with just like an Excel spreadsheet. Some people do something more robust that has like automations and all of those kind of fancy things, keeps track of everything, does automatic conflict searches for you, all those sorts of things. So you want to know what is best for you in your practice and kind of what price point you want. Do you want kind of the low end, but you want to keep track of everything, or do you want something that's more robust and a little bit more high end? You can even get programs that have the video platform in it as well as correspondence within it as well. So you just give each of your parties login credentials for that and everything lives within that system. And that can be very slick, but you want to make sure that you have the volume of clientele to support the purchase or subscription of a product like that. So check in regarding updates to professional standards with ADRIC or your professional governing body. So for a while there, ADRIC was sending out lots of updates regarding online dispute resolution, but they've kind of been quiet for a while. You can look at all of their recommendations from the ODR task force and committee. It's all online. But just always keep an eye out for those sorts of things because you never know when something's going to change. The Law Society never really allowed for virtual witnessing and signing before the pandemic, but that totally changed and there was a huge update to it. And there's even been a more recent update of, hey, here's how we want you to do virtual signing. So you always want to be keeping an eye out for what your governing body is up to and what their current recommendations are. And you always want to be matching whatever highest standard you are. So if you're a member of both the Law Society and ADRIC, you want to make sure that whichever standard is the highest, that's the one that you're holding yourself to when it comes to best practices for ODR and whatever kind of regulations are put on you. Safety screening and adapting the process for safety planning. So you always want to be doing safety screening no matter what the dispute is. So if parties are not romantically involved, it doesn't matter. You still want to do safety screening with them. And then you also want to adapt for what their needs are and what will make the experience as safe psychologically and physically for them as possible. So, for example, as I was talking before, maybe their two parties had some violence between them. It might be very important for them to use a VPN. It might be very important for them to have their camera off. It might be very important for them to have their background blurred. Some other things that may or may not be considerations, and you want to do that those screening questions, you want to do that pre-mediation work with them, is if there's any kind of history of the use of technology that facilitated abuse, whether it is in the dispute that they are in or if it was some kind of prior experience, you want to mitigate any risk to re-traumatization. So somebody who perhaps had intimate images shared online of them might get really triggered by even seeing themselves on video. So coaching them, hey, if you want to be on video so that we can see you, but you want to turn your self view off so you don't see yourself, that's an option for you. If you don't want your image up at all because that's going to be triggering for you, let's turn that off. Let's coach you to make you as comfortable as possible. And also giving breaks, doing those sorts of cues with the parties to, hey, this is a signal that I'm not okay and I need a break and I need a private sidebar. Ongoing improvements. So the digital space and tech moves so quickly that it's very important, even if you're going to do very small scope ODR, to stay up to date on any kind of improvements that are happening. So you want to collect your client feedback as well so that you can implement improvements. You want to try out new programs because you never know what the next best thing is going to be. You want to practice, 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 especially if there's new recommendations coming out or new funky features on your platform of choice. And then stay tuned into the world of online dispute resolution for updates to policies, best practices, and other helpful information that can improve your practice. So again, using the WebEx and Zoom rivalry as an example. So all the government was like very much WebEx only, WebEx only, WebEx only. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh no, you can use Zoom. So you want to keep in mind those sorts of things because the difference in price from WebEx to Zoom was very significant at that time. So keep your eyes out for any kind of policy updates that can help improve the experience for yourself and for your clients. Anyway, thanks for stopping by so much. Here are some helpful resources and my contact information. I do have a course, it's on demand. You can check that out. Also, all the ODR stuff that I helped create when I was part of that task force. Anywho, that's it. I'm going to stop sharing now. Thank you so much. And yeah, I almost took up that whole hour just blabbering on, but I have a couple minutes here if anybody has questions. I'm going to stop the recording. Yeah.